Modulo I. What we know about bullying. Lucian Blog, the University of Cebu. Objectives of the session. At the end of the session, all participants will know what means bullying, what is bullying, ANF, what is not, types of bullying, what are the characteristics of bullying. Bullying according with Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, 2016. Bully is a person who uses his strength and power to scare or hurt weaker people. The best way to identify bullying is to recognize that it is a deliberate act. Bullying can be seen in a negative face-to-face interaction, direct, or through gossip, exclusion, indirect interactions. But what is specific to bullying is the fact that negative actions are taken with the intention of doing harm. There is no legal definition of bullying. Actions in a relationship between a dominant and less dominant person group, which involves an imbalance of power, real or imagined, and manifests itself through aggressive, physical or psychological actions, including verbal or social. A student is being bullied or victimized when he or she is exposed, repeatedly and over time, to negative actions on the part of one or more other students. It is a negative action when someone intentionally inflicts, or attempts to inflict, injury or discomfort upon another, basically what is implied in the definition of aggressive behavior. Bullying is any unwanted aggressive behavior, by another youth or group of youths that involves an observed or perceived power imbalance and is repeated multiple times, or is highly likely to be repeated. It's usually defined as behavior that is repeated intended to hurt someone either physically or emotionally, often aimed at certain groups, for example because of race, religion, gender or sexual orientation. Core elements of bullying. Bullying involves unwanted, aggressive behavior, an observed or perceived imbalance of power between the students doing the bullying and the students being bullied. Behavior that is repeated multiple times, or is highly likely to be repeated. Please answer. Is bullying a normal part of growing up? Yes or no? Please argue. Is bullying the same with disagreement between two or more people? Yes or no? Please argue. Take care. Not every act of violence is an act of bullying. Bullying is recognized by the desire to hurt, painful action, imbalance of power, repetition, typical, unfair use of power, obvious pleasure on the part of the aggressor, feeling of oppression on the part of the victim. How can a teacher recognize a bullied child? The relationship between the students. Nonverbal communication, body language. The teacher must quickly understand whether the behavior is just a game or is, in fact, aggressive. Characteristics of bullying. Occurs systematically and repeatedly. Is committed by a person who perceives himself as stronger than the victim. It is painful and humiliating for the victim. Bullying includes actions such as threatening, spreading rumors in a group of friends, colleagues, or on the internet, attacking someone physically or verbally, and excluding a person from a group. Types of bullying. Bullying could be direct bullying, physical, verbal, indirect bullying, psychological aggression, social. Cyberbullying means posting, showing, sharing abusive comments, or blackmail about uploading harmful images, sometimes targeting vulnerable people online. Using technology to hurt. Racial is a type where someone's bullying focuses on your race, ethnicity, or culture. Sexual, any bullying behavior, whether physical or non-physical, that is based on a person's sexuality or gender. Other types of bullying. Homophobic. People behave or speak in a way which makes someone feel bullied because of their actual or perceived sexuality. Religious/cultural. Deliberately excluding or hurting someone because of their religious beliefs or association. Direct bullying. Physical bullying is recognized by hitting something, kicking, pushing, punching, pulling, destruction or theft of personal property, or any use of violence and personal item destroyed or stolen, etc. Verbal bullying, ironies, slander, threatening, insult, mockery, name-calling and use of rude comments, repeated teasing, mocking nicknames, sexual suggestions and/or approaches, etc. Indirect bullying, whether psychological or social aggression, has the effect of isolation and exclusion. It cannot always be discovered because it spreads very subtly and on channels, often hidden from teachers and/or parents. Examples of indirect harassment are exclusion, ignorance, spreading gossip, rumors, slander, etc. Indirect bullying. Emotional bullying, relational aggression. Tease or mock. Use sarcasm. Threaten. Put down or belittle. Ignore or exclude from a group. Lie. Torment. Humiliate others. Indirect bullying. Psychological bullying is any kind of intentional mental abuse. It can be seen as exclusion from social and/or group activities, social isolation or exclusion from play, during breaks, etc. Psychological aggression is visible through the personal attack of people. Thus, the aggressor can make jokes about a weakness or a physical defect of the other. This usually happens in front of other children, for the purpose of mockery, or as a way for the aggressor to show his superiority over the victim, but even in the eyes of others. Indirect bullying. It is a form of emotionally aggressive behavior, sometimes called indirect aggression, relational aggression, or undercover aggression. It is more difficult to detect because it can appear behind the victim or take the form of public humiliation. This form of bullying attempts to systematically undermine the victim's self-esteem. It can be both direct overt and indirect relational. Characteristics of bullying. Bullying can be carried out by a single individual, the bully, or by a group. The target of bullying can also be a single individual, the victim, or a group. As a group phenomenon, bullying involves different parties such as the perpetrator, the victim, the bystanders, the teachers, the parents. Characteristics of bullying. Places where bullying can occur. The classroom, the schoolyard, the school athletic facilities, the school toilets, the way to and from school. Characteristics of bullying. Age is an important factor in aggression. Usually the victims are younger because they are lighter targets. Specific to these ages are direct bullying. As students grow, direct harassment decreases and indirect harassment increases. Sex is another important variable in bullying. The boys are usually more exposed to aggression than girls, either as perpetrators or as victims, especially in the types of direct aggression, open aggressive behavior. Girls are characterized by indirect bullying, such as gossip, slander, manipulation, etc. But in the last years, in Romania, there is an increasing number of direct bullying with girls as authors. Matthias Pfluner. Characteristics of a bully, victim and bystander. Bully is someone who values the rewards from being aggressive, lacks guilt and believes the victim provoked him and earned the consequences, must be in charge and win, and will justify why they should always get their way. Characteristics of a victim. Usually, victims have more anxious and insecure personalities than others and suffer from low self-esteem. They are characterized by a lack of social skills and are usually isolated and neglected at school. They present themselves as weak, fragile, and unlikely to defend themselves. Characteristics of a bystanders. A bystander is someone who witnesses the aggression, but does nothing to try to stop it. In certain situations, they do not do this out of malice, but are simply unaware of their ability to help. But in other situations, some bystanders may intentionally aggravate the situation by provoking the aggressor into action through laughter, applause, or even joining the aggression. References: Jackie Frunk's Educator blog. Always. Bullying at School: Basic Facts and Effects of a School-Based Intervention Program.